Hi folks, it's Andy. Welcome to this week's Kendo Rant. We are still on the sort of low-tech filming again. We're back to 2018 levels of Kendo Rant. I'm not in the studio at the minute. I'm just, I'm just too busy, to be honest, to set up the studio and do all that sort of thing. So we've got a bit of a sort of stripped down version of Kendo Rant. Sorry about that. I should be back to normal next week, all right? So we're a day late on Kendo Rant as it is, and I'm not in the studio. So yeah, sorry about that. Thanks for the patience though. We'll be back as normal next week, okay? We've got some great questions for you today, and because I'm just sat at my desk, recording them on my desk here, and I'm adjusting the camera as I go, I'm reading them off the screen this time instead of reading them off a piece of paper. So I don't have a piece of paper to wave at you. I've got a book instead. How about that? There. We'll jump into them right in a second. But first, before we do that, don't forget to shop at KendoStar.com. That is the best way to support this channel. If you like the content that we put out for free, and if it brings you any value whatsoever, you need to get over to KendoStar.com and do your shopping there, because of course that is the website that I own. Not only does it support this channel, it's basically the reason it can exist, but it's fantastic, amazing, wonderful Kendo equipment. We've always got amazing deals on. The gear's the best on the market. If you don't believe me, go and check the Trustpilot ratings. Trustpilot, of course, is all independently collected reviews and stuff. We're by far the best rated, both on product and service, so you can't go wrong. Okay, so we've got some great questions. Oh, and there's one more thing, another plug, another shill. People have been asking me about t-shirts, like having Kendo t-shirts or KendoStar themed t-shirts. I've set up a very basic Teespring store. There's a link in the description below. So go and check it out. If you like any of the designs there, I've ordered some samples, so I'll show them up on video when they get here. Teespring's really well reputed. It's got a good reputation, so I'm sure there'll be great quality. I think there's some great designs on there, so go and check them out as well. Okay, let's get into these questions. You missed my question in the last video. Sorry about that. In your last video, you said something about sen. I want to know what that is in Kendo, since it's a term I've never heard before. Okay, so the term sen, basically, it's got a couple of different meanings in Kendo, but the way I always talk about it is in the terms of taking the initiative. To take the sen is to take the initiative. Okay, so when there's two Kendoka that are in a sort of interaction here, the one that kind of takes that initiative, I've got dirty fingernails, I've been unpacking boxes all day. The one that takes the initiative, that makes something happen, is the one that takes the sen. Okay, that's what it is. It's the concept is the initiative, as it were. It can be done with the shinai, it can be done with the body, it can be done with the feet. Okay. Next one. What type of strength training can help to increase power for Kendo? In all honesty, I'm not a massive expert on this sort of thing. I tend to just go for sort of general fitness type things. Things like running, I think HIIT, or whatever you call it, the high intensity interval training. I think that's a really good, got really good benefits for Kendo as well. And doing suburi with like a heavy suburi toe like this, a suburi bokken, like this, I think is cool as well. Next, just out of morbid curiosity, is it possible to visit a police dojo in Japan and train in police Kendo? Yeah, it's possible, but you can't just walk in and do that. You need to be invited. And that's the same, you know, there's not many places in Japan you can just turn up and practice. There are some, but a police dojo isn't one. If you're going to go to Japan and practice Kendo, you're going to have a much better experience if you know somebody there that can introduce you to dojos to practice at. And that definitely goes for police dojos. You can't just walk into a police station, because the dojos are in the station. You can't just walk into a police station and walk into the area that's for employees only, right? So yeah, you need to be allowed in. Now, not all police dojo are like super hardcore tokuren practices. Tokuren are the guys that are their main focus of their police work is kendo training. Most police dojo aren't that. Most police stations have a dojo, and some of them have more than one, and it's for the officers' use, and lots of them just have I hesitate to say, well, it's a kind of recreational practice. I mean, it can be considered part of their training, and they can do it on work time in some cases, especially before a police tournament. But they don't do the same sort of practice that like the guys that are at the sort of elite level do. Next one. Hi, Andy. I just acquired a copy of the All Japan Kendo Federation's official guide for Kendo instruction from some outfit called KendoStar. You mean an absolutely amazing, wonderful, perfect Kendo shop called KendoStar. You may have heard of them. Yeah, I've heard of them. They're actually okay. They're actually amazing, brilliant. So go and shop there. Anyway, the latest guide includes images and instructions for adapting for adopting the 5 different kamae, but not one technique shown in the book uses anything other than Jodan, and Jodan is only given a cursory discussion in one section. Jodan is commonly seen in videos and Jodan less so, but it's still practice. However, I've never seen Wakigamae or Gedan used in Shiai, and I think I've only ever seen you post a single old video of a Japanese Kendo using what looked like Hasso no Kamae. Why, if these Kamae are retained purely for their historical relevance and linked to the Kendo kata, do they still feature in the current Kendo instruction manuals? Okay, so let's summarize that question, all right? There's 5 kamae in Kendo: Jodan, Jodan, Gedan, Hasso, and Wakigamae. They all feature in the Nihon Kendo kata. We mainly see Jodan and sometimes Jodan with Shinai, and we sort of see Hasso like from a kind of between Jodan, like from here lots of Jodan players drop to Hasso before striking, technically, and there's that one video I think I posted from the Kyoto Taikai where the sensei was fighting the Nito sensei, Toda sensei I think, and he took Hasso against it, and that was in the Hanshi division where they don't count the Yuko Datotsu, so it's a little bit of a special situation, that particular one. So essentially, I guess the question is why don't we see Wakigamae and Gedan or really Hasso used in Shiai? And if they're just for the kata, why are they in the instruction manual? Okay, so it's a difficult question. They're not used in Shiai because they're not effective. Wakigamae is not effective at all in modern Kendo from a competitive perspective. Neither is Gedan and neither really is Hasso, except when it's sort of combined with Jodan. But really, if we were to look at it from a point of view of data, like the sort of metrics, Jodan is not as effective kamae as Jodan either, because the effective players with Jodan far outweigh those that do Jodan. So Jodan is by far the sort of best kamae in for the most part. And that's why you see it so often in Shiai and in Shinai Kendo. We still keep the other kamae because they're relevant in the deepest study of Kendo, both through the kata, and although we don't use them in a competitive scenario, we might, there's elements from the kata that we learn about the whole concepts of Kendo from. And they feature in the book because they are part of Kendo. They exist as part of Kendo. Now that book doesn't cover kata, the one that you mentioned, but it does include those kamae because many teachers do, and the All Japan Kendo Federation's syllabus, shall we say, it doesn't really have a syllabus, but if we call that book a syllabus, does introduce those kamae as the concept of kamae. Yeah. So that's why I think they're in there. I don't necessarily, I mean, I don't think that book would lose much if you lost those pages, but I don't think it does it any harm to have them in either. So I don't think it's, a major thing. If those pages came out of that book and went into a kata book, it wouldn't make a massive difference. But I don't think it's a big problem that they're in there either. Next one, I've recently read an article on Yuko.otu where the author compared the job of shimpan in Kendo with what the judges do in sports like gymnastics or diving. In these sports, judges are guided by their subjective understanding of the performance. Can you comment on it? Another question, I built an uchikomidai out of tyres and I put it in the garden, but I'm slowly destroying our lawn with my exercises, and my wife will throw me out if I continue doing it. Do you or anyone in the group know what I can do to work with an uchikomidai and not ruin my lawn? Yeah, okay, so about the Yuko.otu, I understand where you're coming from in terms of where the article's going, actually, in terms of the Yuko.otu being similar to like gymnastics or diving. I don't know how gymnastics scoring or diving scoring works, or any figure skating or anything like that. I don't know. I've got no idea. I don't think it's perfectly accurate to say that Yuko.otu are guided by a subjective understanding of the performance. It is largely subjective because it's judged by humans who have their own sort of subjective understanding in the same way as, but it's guided by a set of objective rules, which are here. And they're written out. Now, that's a Japanese version, but there's an English version out on the web, and I've got a video about it as well, actually, called Yuko.otu. The rules of Yuko.otu are objective, and then the application of them or the awarding of the points is to some extent subjective. I see that. But that's the same for anything you could say, couldn't you? The law, for example, is objective, but it's, lawyers will probably have a subjective interpretation of it, I guess. I don't know. It's not a specialist field of mine either. But I'm sure the same sort of thing goes for that as well. But that's why there's divided opinion on lots of things, right? I have a bit of a problem calling the idea of Yuko.otu a subjective decision, because it's not. But it is based on a subjective understanding, which is a word you put. Rather of the performance, not of the performance, but of the rules, the objective rules that are set out for us. Okay. This book, by the way, is the Shimpan, Shiai Shimpan, Kisoku Tebiki or something like that. It's the like subsidiary guidebook for the rules. All right. It goes hand in hand with the rule book, but there isn't an English version officially out there. But Stroud Sensei, actually from the USA, has got an English translation that's excellent, which I think is out there on the internet as well. Next one. I'm wondering if Jodan is good for one strike only. Are there any Renzoku-waza for Jodan? I don't think I've seen it in competition and being recognised as a point, thank you. Yes, Renzoku-waza does work for Jodan. Most people aren't able to do it because of the immense strength that's required to wield a shinai with one hand. Most people can't do the katate-waza, like for Ippon waza, never mind Nidan-Waza. But I wouldn't say I'm confident at doing that myself. It does exist. It's extremely hard to do, and it's perfectly possible to score a point with it. But it's also exceptionally rare because it's super hard. I can think of successful kendoka, though, that have done so and scored points in high-level, elite-level shiai. Next one. If you had a time machine and could visit your former self just starting kendo, what advice would you have for yourself? And another curiosity, how do people in Japan look at internationals doing kendo? I imagine it'd be quite different perspective when it's something you grow up with versus something you pick up later in life as a foreigner. Yeah. Okay, so if I had a time machine, I could visit my former self just starting Kendo. What advice would I have for myself? The first piece of advice is pay more attention to footwork. I definitely did not pay enough attention to that in the early years of Kendo. It was much harder to fix later on. Pay more attention to suburi, pay more attention to the basics. And don't get cocky, because I had that sort of second and third dan era of my life, particularly where, like I mentioned in the last video, where you reach that sort of peak arrogance where you think you know a lot but don't realize how much you don't know. About how do people in Japan look at foreign people doing Kendo? You can't really generalize like that, if I'm honest. Lots of people see it differently. I lived in Japan for almost 10 years, and when I met somebody new that had never met a foreign person doing Kendo before, which was lots, because lots of people don't come into contact with foreigners that often, especially as where I lived when I moved to Kyushu and Kumamoto and Fukuoka. They didn't see many foreigners at all. Now, I had a very different experience to what most people do. Now, the thing is the first reaction I would generally get would be surprised that there's foreign people doing Kendo. Many people in Japan don't realize that there's Kendo outside of Japan, and people outside of Japan even know what Kendo is. Certainly not in Europe and America and stuff like that. So that's the first thing. Then it depends. It depends. The first few years I was there, I was pretty rubbish. So, but I didn't realize at the time, and it's basically like what most people would react to me is they'd tell me how good I was, but it was like, it didn't mean like you're really good. It means like you're better than I thought you would be, which means you can do Jodan no Kamae sort of thing. But once I started getting into good relationships with certainly senseis really understood that I was serious about improving at Kendo, which takes time. Most of them think you're probably not that serious about it. Well, this is just my experience. Thought that I probably wasn't that serious about it. So, they were just like, oh yeah, good job, well done, sort of thing. And it wasn't until I'd sort of been there for a few months with the same sensei that they'd start to give me proper criticism. And then probably it was maybe 6 or 7 years of being, maybe less, maybe 5, 6 years into there. Well, after probably a couple of years after I got my Jodan, and I started to understand Kendo, from this is a really weird, and I'm going to open a can of worms with this, but from a Japanese perspective, and I'm not saying that I definitely fully understand it from a Japanese perspective, but I started to realize that the perspective towards Kendo, the sort of the mental approach towards Kendo as not just an activity, but as a community in terms of the people that you interact with, in the dojo, is different and from a Japanese mindset than from a Western mindset. And once I started to understand that and pick up parts of that, then I was able to actually make progress in my own Kendo progression. And it's one of the reasons, I've said this before, and it's probably controversial, I think that to really progress as much as possible. Going back to the other question about the time machine, the first thing I would say to myself is start to learn Japanese earlier, because that relates to this. I've said this before, like I say, it's controversial, but I do think that to really improve as much as you possibly can, you set yourself at a much better advantage of doing that if you can understand Japanese. So once I started to understand that sort of mindset or approach to Kendo, and how I fit in the dojo community, and that changed depending on which dojo I was in, then I started to improve, and the way people reacted to me started to change. I started to be treated more of less of an outsider or an oddball or something like that. Not that it treated me like a freak or something, just like I'd stopped being treated like a visitor, and they started to welcome me as another member of the community, because I kind of got it. And then they sort of started to respect my Kendo ability a bit more as well, and that was improving as well. So like I kind of could back it up a bit more. And that's when I started getting into the position where I was starting to teach youngsters Kendo from little kids to junior high school and high school students. I was getting, they were allowing me to fulfill those sort of roles. Because it wasn't just that I could back up at the time, I could back up the actual Kendo physical part, but I could fit in with the cultural side of it as well, if that makes sense. It's a bit of a difficult one, but everybody's experience is going to be so different with that, okay? Everyone's different. Everybody's going to have such a different experience. Next, what training could I take to improve my agility and intuition for offense and defense in Kendo? Just the same thing as I said before, to be honest. I think that high intensity interval training is a really good way to go. I think Nishimura-san, the previous All Japan champion, he put one out, like a Kendo related HIIT session. I think that sort of thing would be really, really good. Next one, question about counting. Which numbers are used? Does it vary from dojo to dojo? I tried looking it up, but the Japanese language guides use different ones to the usual 1 to 10. For example, nana instead of shichi. I'm specifically looking to know the tens and hundreds. Thanks in advance. Okay, so here's the thing about counting, and it's not just counting; it's lots of things in Kendo. We have a tendency to use Japanese words in Kendo as terminology, and this counts for the numbers as well. When they are not. It's not terminology, it's language, it's fluid and it's alive. And Japanese is a particularly unusual language when thought about from a native English speaker's point of view, certainly, because they have more than one way of pronouncing most words. Most words have at least two ways of pronouncing it, because they have the native Japanese pronunciation, and then they have the sort of Japanized, is that a word? Like Chinese pronunciation as well, because they imported the kanji over. So actually the whole 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, that's actually the Chinese pronunciation of, it's not Chinese, it's the kind of sort of the Japanese, is that, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like the Japanese version of the Chinese pronunciation of those words. Sometimes they rarely say, actually in everyday life, they don't often say shichi for 7. You use the example of shichi for 7. They usually say nana for most things. And it's the same for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. They often say yon, which is why we say yondan instead of shidan, right? Or Jodan. More often people say Jodan rather than Yondan, but for some reason we say Yondan more often outside. I guess that the person who popularized it probably said, it could be a regional thing though, it could be depending where I lived, probably people just said Jodan. Anyway, some people do say like 1, 2, 3, 4. Don't hear it so often. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's perfectly makes sense. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 it rolls off the tongue better, so it tends to be the more common way people count stuff in succession, like suburi, or if they're counting stuff, counting stuff out, they'll usually use those words because it just rolls off the tongue better. But that could depend on the person and their dialect or where they're from. My kids, when they were at nursery, I'm pretty sure I might be wrong now because it was a long time ago, but I'm pretty sure they learn counting as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They didn't say shichi, they said nana. I'm pretty sure of it. For the first couple of years, but they did learn to say shichi as well. So yeah, both of them are valid, but it's more natural to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So yeah, and then in terms of tens and hundreds, it's in Kendo particularly, but it's not just in Kendo. If you're counting lots of anything, most people in Japan will just count in tens, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or sometimes they'll say, like if it's just counted to 25 or something, they're counting 25 pencils out or something like that. They might just, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, like that. But like in a Kendo context, all right, they normally count to 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then for the second set, they'll say ni, so they'll say 2 instead of 1. And then for the third set, they'll say 3 instead of 1, right? So they replace ichi with the number of sets it is. So go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 3, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, like that. Okay, 4, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 5, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 2, 2, that sort of thing is how they would do it. And then I've never yeah, that's generally how people would do. Or they would just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like that, and then just mentally keep a count of how many they've done. It's rare that they'll sit down and do 500 of the same suburi. Even the places that do really hard training, it's rare that they'll do more than 100 of one in any one time. They'll usually do them in some kind of set. So even if they did them in a set of 100, which is rare actually, but they go all the way up to 9, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then shaku would be the end, and then that will probably be the end. I can't imagine, I've never seen a practice where they did 500 suburi or 300 suburi non-stop without a break in the sets. And when they start a new set, they would start counting again. Next one, any advice on wearing cotton gloves under the kote? Do you plan on selling some? Is there any restrictions on them for shiai grading? I can sell them if you want. Is there a demand for it? Do people want me to have cotton gloves that go under the kote? Some people like them. My wife sometimes likes to wear them just to stop your hands smelling a bit. I don't like them. I find them a little bit slippy underneath the kote. I don't like it personally, so that's why they're not on there right now. I can certainly get them. There's no problem with that. In terms of the wearing them in shiai or grading, yeah, you're allowed to wear them in that generally. Hi, I hope you're well. I have a question in relation to gradings. In most other martial arts, they have an outward show of grades earned from Q through to downgrades. I must admit, I like the idea in Kendo of no outward show of grade, but I just wonder why Kendo has the system. So, that's a really great question. Basically, the idea of the outward show of grades, particularly the coloured belt system that we have in lots of martial arts, came from judo. And Kendo's grades, the whole Jodan system that we have now, that was actually ported over from judo. It had a different one. I think I looked into this a bit last week or week before, and basically it used to only go up to 5th dan, was the top grade, and then they changed it to 10th dan to fit with judo, basically. So it was in this on the same sort of scale. But then they changed it again, so that they didn't change it. They just decided that in the early 2000s they weren't going to award anything higher than 8th dan anymore. I don't know exactly why we didn't come up with, it wasn't standardized that we have some kind of colored display of the grades. I know there are places that do it. But part of it actually, I think, is because in Japan, where Kendo is obviously practiced by far more than anywhere else, the most people doing Kendo is kids, and the Q grades are almost exclusively kids, right? Q grades are basically for kids in Japan. And they use the Q grades as just practice for doing a real grading, like for their Jodan grading, or they do an EQ grading actually. But like no shiai or no classes or nothing is separated by grade. It's all done by age. So what some dojos do have, like some sort of outward display of the categories, but it's usually done by age or school year. So all the first years might have a coloured patch on their arm or different coloured himo. I've seen both of those sort of things. But I've never seen it by grade, like the Q or something like that, because like it's not really used for anything. So like if there's no like fourth Q Shiai category or something like that, it's always like second years or first to third years or something like that. So I think that's probably more why about it is. I could be wrong though. Next one, during our online club meeting tonight, we were discussing tsuki, and the advice that if you're able to do tsuki, you should cut men was brought up. When asked why this was, we didn't have a definitive answer. What are your thoughts? Have you heard this before? I think I was one of the first people to put that sort of idea out on the internet. It's something I've said myself before when people have been asking me about ski is, if in theory, if you can hit ski, you can hit men. And for the most part, that's true. Now, it's not completely true. Actually, there are times that ski is a better choice of waza than men, particularly if the opponent is taking a large step back. It can be a bit hard to reach men. But basically, to hit ski, you have to control the center, don't you? Yeah, obviously, because that's where you're hitting. So if you can get your shinai here, you can get it here, right? Okay, if you can get it here, you can get it here, all right? And men is certainly a clearer, more significant, not significant, but more obvious point to strike than ski. It's much easier to score a clean men strike than it is to, even if you have the shiai, if you hit the clean ski, it's sometimes difficult with shimpan to see it, to judge it properly and stuff like that. Whereas men, it doesn't have that. It doesn't make a noise when you hit ski, So that's wise, because if you've got the center, control of the center to the extent where you can hit tsuki, then you can also hit men. So why would you hit tsuki? Most people do it to kind of prove a point or like kind of big themselves up a bit. But I've been guilty of it too. But actually, if you look at some of the other, like the really successful players that use tsuki, they do it at a time probably where men wouldn't be the waza to select, like when the opponent's stepping back, or when they, if you take the example of Eiga Sensei from the World Championships in 2003, his opponent sort of does a big harai to shinai and then readjusts his distance, and Eiga Sensei fires in with that katate tsuki, that one-handed tsuki that has the extra reach that you wouldn't get with men strike. That's a different case. Okay, but that's where the idea behind that comes. Okay, this is the last one. I was wondering as to what your suburi routine is like. Do you use a suburito, a regular bokuto shinai, or alternate between both? I like to use a suburito like this as much as I can, because it's heavy and it makes me stronger, is the theory. I like to, but I do use the shinai as well. I've always got them by my desk here. I like to use a heavy one as much as I can. As I've gotten older, that's gotten a little bit harder. I've started to, I had it last year. I had a bit of a problem with tennis elbow, but I've got exercise and physio and stuff to work that out. Now that's getting better. But if I do too much with the heavier one, sometimes it can start to sting a little bit in my elbow. So I switch back to the lighter one. I prefer to use the heavier one when I can, but sometimes I often use that one as well. And I also do use the Kiri Bokdo a lot as well. I've got that here as well. This one, the Kiri Bokdo. This is a Bokdo that's very, very light. You can't use it for kata. You can't hit it against anything. It's basically like balsa wood. It's not balsa wood. It's Polonia, I think is what it is. Kiri, it's called. It's the Japanese word. They use it to make boxes for swords and stuff. But basically, it's super, super light. It's much lighter than a shinai. It's like 200 grams or something, 250 grams, something like that. So it's really light, but it's really good for developing tanuchi and striking with the feeling of ichibyoshi. So yeah, that's what I like to do. In terms of an actual routine, I generally follow the sort of things that I do, you know, the Subiria long videos that I've done. I generally follow that sort of thing. When I've got time, right? Recently, I don't have time, all right? Because this whole lockdown thing has been nuts for us, okay? We've just been doing our very best to help everyone, obviously, because we don't have much staff here because, you know, we've had to, you know, let people stay home and all that sort of thing. From next week, though, things are starting to ease. And, you know, obviously, responsibly, we're going to start bringing our staff back. So hopefully I can give you a little bit more time. I know I haven't put as many videos out as I've wanted to over these last couple of weeks. I have been doing my best, though. I've been doing my best, and I have been putting up quite a lot of videos over the last couple of months, to be fair. I've got Zero Jodan still coming. I am still planning to keep doing live streams and stuff like that. So yeah, if you like what we do, if you like these videos, we're the only ones doing it. We're the only ones that can do it. So support us, because it's all free. Yeah, all this stuff is free. Because I want it to be free. I want you all to benefit from it. I want you to enjoy it. I want it to be useful for you all. But if it does give you value at all, then do indeed support us by shopping at KendoStar. You can buy t-shirts at the new t-shirt shop, link in the description. And join the Kendo Show Early Access group. I've not mentioned that, but that's where all these questions have come from. And that's where I post live streams as well. So yeah, definitely join that. That's it for today. It's been quite a long video. Sorry for the basic setup. I should be back to normal next week. Have a fantastic weekend. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.